Hayes sat in a chair that was not made for human bodies. The seat curved in directions that made her spine uncomfortable, and her feet dangled slightly above the floor. Around her, representatives from 17 alien species occupied similar chairs, though theirs seemed to fit them perfectly. This was intentional. Everything at Meridian Station was designed to remind visiting species that they were guests in a universe that had been organized long before their arrival. The examination hall was vast. Its walls glowed with a soft blue light that came from nowhere and cast no shadows. Hundreds of hovering cameras positioned themselves at various angles, recording every movement, every hesitation, every choice. Could feel the weight of observation pressing down on her shoulders. This was not just a test for her. It was a test for all of humanity. Dr. Adrian Cole sat in the observation deck above the examination hall, separated from the participants by a transparent barrier that only worked one way. He could see them, but they could not see him. Did not know he was there, watching with the kind of intensity reserved for moments that could change history. Humanity's first official evaluation by the Galactic Council would determine whether they were worthy of full membership or whether they would remain under probationary status for another decade. Commander Vex stood at the front of the examination hall. His skin rippled with patterns of red and gold as he waited for all participants to settle into their seats. The reptilian supervisor had overseen this test for 500 galactic cycles. He had seen species rise and fall, prove themselves worthy and prove themselves dangerous. He had seen everything, or so he believed. His voice, when he finally spoke, came from speakers embedded in the walls, creating the illusion that the room itself was speaking. Today, you will complete the standard threat assessment examination. This evaluation is required for all newly contacted species seeking full membership within the Galactic Council. Your ability to identify genuine threats from false indicators will determine whether your civilization is compatible with peaceful coexistence among established powers. There are no correct answers in the traditional sense, only answers that demonstrate sufficient judgment. This was a lie, and everyone in the room knew it. There were correct answers. There were always correct answers. The test was designed to see if new species would think correctly, which meant thinking like the Galactic Council thought. Species that deviated from Council reasoning were noted as potential problems. Species that conformed were approved and granted access to trade routes, technology exchange agreements, and military support. Looked at the beings around her. The representative had a body like a giant mantis with compound eyes that never blinked. Its forearms rested on the armrests of its chair with perfect stillness. To its left sat something that resembled a floating crystal formation, pulsing with internal light. To her right was a being shrouded in clouds of gas, contained only by some kind of invisible force field. These were not animals. These were civilizations with histories that stretched back thousands of years longer than humanity had existed. They knew how to think correctly. Knew she did not belong here. She was 26 years old, born on a planet called Earth that orbited a star most civilizations had never heard of. She had been selected for this evaluation because she scored highest on humanity's preliminary assessment tests. But preliminary was the operative word. She had spent her entire life on a world where danger came without warning, where the environment itself could kill you, where predators hunted in ways that were not always obvious. The examination began with a holographic display that filled the space between the chairs and the wall. It showed a section of space near a star system called a region of known trade routes and established settlements. Scenario 1, Commander Vex announced. You are observing a complex situation developing in this region. 5 distinct groups are present. You must identify which represents the greatest threat to galactic stability and peace. The hologram divided into 5 separate images, each showing a different faction. The first image showed a massive military fleet arranged in precise formation. The ships bristled with weapons and energy weapons. The collective was conducting training maneuvers. Their designation was well known throughout the galaxy. They were considered aggressive, territorial, and militaristic. A decade ago, they had fought a border conflict with another council member. The conflict had been resolved through diplomacy, but the collective's military strength remained legendary. The second image showed a merchant convoy moving between space stations. The ships were smaller, designed for cargo transport rather than combat. A merchant consortium from the outer territories of the galaxy moved goods between worlds. They were known for profit-seeking and occasionally shady dealings, but they had never started a war or threatened stability. The third image showed a small research expedition near a planet marked with warnings. The scientific team wore protective gear as they extracted samples from the surface. The planet itself was marked red on all navigation charts, which meant it was forbidden. Research there required special permissions from the Galactic Council, permission that was rarely granted. The fourth image showed an agricultural colony. Vast fields of crops grew beneath a protective dome. Simple farm buildings dotted the landscape. A peaceful settlement. The colony had existed for 3 galactic cycles, which made it stable and established. The people who lived there grew food for the nearby systems. Nothing threatening, nothing military, nothing that would concern anyone. Fifth image showed something smaller. It was barely visible on the hologram, a small human mining operation on the surface of an asteroid. Humans were new to galactic civilization, still learning the rules and the customs. This mining operation was technically operating under questionable legal status because the permit had not been fully processed by the proper authorities, but it was not a military threat. It was just humans trying to prove they could do the work like any other species. Everyone in the examination hall understood the question being asked, even though it was not asked in words. Which of these would you eliminate first if you had to protect the galaxy? The representative moved first. Multiple limbs operated a control interface in front of its seat. Its choice appeared on a display that everyone could see. The collective, the military threat, the known aggressive power. The crystalline being made a flowing motion with what might be described as limbs, though the movement happened through its translucent body rather than attached appendages. Its choice also appeared on the display. The collective, same answer. The gaseous entity pulsed with a different color. Different species had different ways of making choices, but the display read the intention and translated it into words. The collective, again. One by one, around the examination hall, every single species made the same choice. Every representative selected the collective as the threat that needed to be addressed. The pattern was clear. The answer was expected. The answer was correct. Did not move, she sat in her uncomfortable chair and watched the hologram. She watched the military fleet with its weapons. She watched the merchant convoy. She watched the scientists on the forbidden planet. She watched the agricultural colony. She watched the human mining operation. And then she saw something that no one else seemed to notice. It was not visible in the images themselves. It was in the patterns between them. It was in what the scenario was trying to hide by focusing attention on the obvious military threat. It was in the small details that did not make sense when examined carefully. The agricultural colony's location, the supply lines that connected it to other settlements, the unusual energy signatures that pulsed beneath its peaceful appearance. Had spent her entire life on Earth, a world where danger came quietly, where predators hunted not with displays of strength but with patience and deception, where survival meant seeing through camouflage and recognizing the hunter that looked like the grass. She reached forward and made her choice. Her hand moved across the control interface in front of her chair. The display translated her selection into words that appeared for everyone to see. The agricultural colony. The silence in the examination hall stretched longer than any silence should be allowed to stretch. Could feel the weight of it pressing against her chest. The cameras that had been recording continuously now seemed to focus entirely on her. Around the room, representatives from other species turned their visual sensors, optical organs, and sensory apparatus in her direction. She was suddenly the center of an attention she had not requested and did not want. Commander Vex's scales began to pulse again, moving through a pattern that recognized as disapproval. Her translator implant, installed just before she entered the examination hall, converted the biological display into words that appeared in her mind. Not right, not expected, not proper. Please explain your selection, Commander Vex said. His voice carried no emotion, but the lack of emotion itself was a form of judgment. The Galactic Council awaits your reasoning. Stood up, she had been instructed not to stand during the examination unless given explicit permission. But she was going to stand anyway. Dr. Adrian Cole, watching from the observation deck, made a small gesture of concern but said nothing. Humans were supposed to follow procedures. Humans were supposed to respect authority, but had spent her entire life breaking rules that did not make sense. She looked directly at Commander Vex. The collective is displaying defensive military posture, not aggressive expansion. Their fleet arrangement is designed to protect territory, not to project power outward. Their weapons configuration matches historical patterns associated with threat response rather than invasion preparation. But the agricultural colony shows signs of rapid construction, concealed infrastructure, and energy signatures that do not match typical farming operations. The crystalline being pulsed with a curious color. How do you detect energy signatures from a holographic representation? There are no actual readings provided in this scenario. You are correct. There are no overt readings, but the holographic scenario includes background data embedded in the images. If you examine the satellite imaging carefully, you can see that power distribution to the agricultural colony is inconsistent with its stated population. The crop growth patterns show artificial acceleration. The construction materials used for farm buildings contain compounds that are not typically used in agriculture, but are common in military defense systems. An old human would have called this learning. An old human would have said that had learned these things in school or through study, but had not learned these things in school. She had learned them by living. She had learned them by watching her parents survive on Earth. She had learned them by understanding that creatures which wanted to kill you often hid their intentions behind appearance and normality. The gaseous entity pulsed with what might have been interest. Even if your analysis of the agricultural colony is correct, the established threat remains the collective. They possess military capacity and have demonstrated aggression in their historical record. A threat that exists right now is more dangerous than a threat that might exist in the future. But that is not what the question asked, said. The question asked which represents the greatest threat to galactic stability. A threat that is known and visible can be monitored and controlled. A threat that is hidden behind a false appearance of peace is far more dangerous. Commander Vex consulted with other members of the examination board through some form of communication that did not involve sound. His scales flickered with patterns that translator could not fully interpret. Your reasoning shows unusual lateral thinking. However, your conclusion remains incorrect. The agricultural colony has been monitored by the Galactic Council for 3 cycles. It has been peaceful and compliant with all regulations. The collective has demonstrated territorial aggression and expansion seeking. Your answer does not match the standard threat assessment protocol. Felt something cold move through her body. She had known that answering differently would be marked as incorrect. She had known that the Galactic Council expected conformity, but hearing the words still hit like a physical blow. Respect, she said carefully. The standard threat assessment protocol was designed by civilizations with histories thousands of years longer than humanity's. Your protocols identify threats based on visible military strength and historical behavior patterns, but they fail to account for deception and camouflage. On my world Earth, predators do not announce their presence. They hide until the moment they strike. Humanity has developed the ability to see through that kind of deception. We have to. We live on a world where everything wants to kill us. The representative made its clicking sound again, louder this time. Its multiple eyes focused on with something that might have been contempt or amusement. Your world is a primitive death planet. You have been in galactic civilization for barely 5 years. Your methods are emotional and paranoid, not rational and evidence-based. The collective is known. The collective is understood. The collective is the threat. Sat back down, she had said what she needed to say. She had explained her reasoning. It did not matter. The Galactic Council had already decided what the answer should be. Her job was not to think. Her job was to arrive at the same conclusion that the older civilizations had already reached. Commander Vex continued the examination. 3 more scenarios were presented. In each one, refused to give the expected answer. In each one, her reasoning was technically sound, but her conclusions were incorrect according to the standard protocol. By the time the examination ended, had been marked as a significant deviation from expected species behavior. Her file would be flagged. Humanity's threat assessment capability would be noted as unreliable. They would be probationary for another decade or perhaps longer. Dr. Adrian Cole waited in the exit corridor outside the examination hall. His face was pale, and his hands were trembling slightly. He had watched his entire career potentially collapse over the course of a single afternoon. "What were you thinking?" he asked quietly. "You were supposed to demonstrate that humanity could think logically. You were supposed to show the Council that we were compatible with their decision-making processes." Looked at the man who had championed humanity's entry into galactic civilization. "I was thinking that their decision-making process was wrong. I was thinking that hiding the truth does not change the truth. I was thinking that being afraid to tell them they are wrong would hurt us more in the long run than telling them now." Dr. Adrian Cole closed his eyes. You may have just set humanity back by decades. But was looking past him, through the viewport that showed the stars beyond Meridian Station. Somewhere out there in that vast darkness, things were happening that the Galactic Council could not see. Threats were forming that the standard protocols had been designed not to notice. The briefing room was windowless and gray. Sat across from Commander Vex and two other members of the examination board. Their names were a being of crystalline structure and who existed as a concentrated cloud of gas held together by gravity manipulation technology. They looked at her the way a teacher might look at a child who insisted that 2 plus 2 equaled 5. Your petition for reconsideration has been reviewed, Commander Vex said. His scales pulsed with a pattern that had come to recognize as administrative finality. The examination board has determined that your answers, while individually reasoned, represent a fundamental misunderstanding of threat assessment theory. Humans are a young species. Your perspective, while interesting, lacks the historical context necessary for proper evaluation. Had spent the last 3 days gathering data. She had requested access to the archived information about the agricultural colony. She had pulled satellite images, power consumption records, and communication logs. What she had found made her certain that her initial instinct had been correct. She placed a data tablet on the table in front of Commander Vex. The agricultural colony was established by the Collective 7 cycles ago. The Collective has no record with the Galactic Council for 3 cycles, which is when they supposedly started this peaceful farming operation. But I found historical records. The Collective has ties to the Union, a faction that attempted to colonize the outer reaches of this galaxy and was stopped by a military coalition. Its crystalline structure flickered with patterns of shifting color. This connection is 3 cycles old. Rehabilitation and reformation are recognized practices within galactic civilization. Species that have committed aggression in the past are frequently given second chances. That is true, said, but look at the energy consumption records. A colony of 12,000 people should use approximately this much power. She highlighted a graph on her tablet. But the actual consumption is 40 times higher than expected. The excess power is being used for something that requires significant energy, something that is being hidden. Its gaseous form swirled with what might have been irritation. Young human, you are examining data through a lens of suspicion. You see the normal variations in power consumption and interpret them as evidence of malice. This is the paranoia I mentioned. This is the thinking of a species that expects danger because your world is dangerous. Not all danger is real. Felt anger rise in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. The scientists on the Forbidden Planet, they extracted biological samples that required extreme containment. The research permits show they were studying a pathogen that had been quarantined for 500 years. A weapon. The Galactic Council itself deemed it too dangerous to allow access under any circumstances. The research was conducted with proper authorization, Commander Vex said. The samples are secure in Council facilities. There is no evidence of unauthorized extraction or transportation. Then explain the merchant convoy's route, said. She activated another section of her data. They moved through the region 17 times in the last cycle. Their official cargo manifests show routine trade goods, but their actual navigation path shows they made 3 deviations from standard routes. 3 deviations to pass near the Forbidden Planet research site. 3 opportunities for cargo exchange that would not appear in any official records. Examine the data with what appeared to be genuine interest. This is circumstantial. A merchant convoy changing routes could have 100 legitimate reasons. Avoiding space dust, taking advantage of solar winds, responding to client requests. All of which would be recorded in communication logs, said. And they are not. The convoys made those route deviations without any communication from either the agricultural colony or the research station, which means they were coordinated before departure, which means someone planned this. Commander Vex leaned back in his chair, or what served as a chair for a reptilian body. What exactly are you suggesting? That the Collective is conducting a coordinated conspiracy involving the Merchant Consortium and the scientific team, that they are attempting to move a biological weapon. This is a serious accusation. I am not suggesting it, said. I am stating it based on data analysis. The agricultural colony is not a farm, it is a staging ground. The biological weapon is being moved there through the merchant convoys. The research team was collecting it from the Forbidden Planet. This is happening now. The three members of the examination board exchanged looks that did not require translator interpretation. They thought she was wrong. They thought she was seeing patterns where none existed. They thought her young mind, shaped by fear and survival instincts, was interpreting coincidence as conspiracy. Your analysis will be noted in humanity's official file, Commander Vex said finally. Your ability to construct complex theories from limited data is noted as a species trait. However, this same trait appears to create false positives at an unacceptable rate. The Galactic Council has monitored the agricultural colony continuously for 3 cycles. If there were genuine threat indicators, Council sensors would have detected them. Our systems are sophisticated and reliable. Your systems are looking for military signatures, said. They are looking for weapons development in obvious ways. They are not looking for deception because your civilizations do not use deception as a survival strategy. On Earth, deception is survival. We evolved to see through it. Made a gesture that indicated the conversation was finished. You will return to Earth with your diplomatic delegation as scheduled. Your preliminary evaluation will remain on file. Humanity will remain under probationary status. This meeting is concluded. Dr. Adrian Cole was waiting for outside the briefing room. His face looked aged, worn down by the weight of dealing with bureaucracy and dismissal. They rejected your evidence. They did not even look at it properly, said. They listened to what I said, but they did not hear it. They heard a young woman from a primitive planet making wild accusations against established civilizations and established procedures. Then we have to accept that, Dr. Adrian Cole said. His voice had taken on a quality of resignation. We have to work with the Council, not against them. Humanity cannot afford to be seen as hostile or suspicious. We need their support. Wanted to argue? She wanted to explain that some battles were more important than reputation. But she understood that Dr. Adrian Cole was right in his own way. Humanity was new. Humanity was vulnerable. Humanity could not afford to make enemies among the established powers. That night lay in her quarters on Meridian Station. She could see Earth in the sky if she looked hard enough, a small blue dot orbiting a yellow star. She had been selected to represent her entire species because she was the best humanity had to offer, and she had failed. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, her dreams were filled with images of hidden threats and ignored warnings. 3 days before the human delegation was scheduled to depart Meridian Station, an emergency distress signal erupted through the communication network. It came from the coordinates where the agricultural colony was located. It came from a vessel broadcasting the identifier code of a merchant convoy belonging to the consortium had flagged. The command center of Meridian Station transformed in seconds. What had been a place of bureaucratic order became a space of coordinated chaos. Holographic displays materialized in the air, showing tactical information, sensor data, and real-time updates from the compromised location. Military vessels began launching from docking bays. Communication channels crackled with urgent directives in a dozen different languages. Watched from a corridor as command staff officers rushed past her. She had no official position here. She was not military. She was not a diplomat anymore. She was just a young human woman whose warnings had been ignored and were now proving catastrophically correct. Dr. Adrian Cole found her in that corridor. He moved quickly for a man his age, and his face carried an expression that mixed vindication with horror. Come with me. They want to see you. The central strategy room was filled with the highest-ranking members of the Galactic Council's military command. General, who led the Council's rapid response forces, stood before a massive holographic display showing the geographical region where the crisis was unfolding. Beside him stood Commander Vex. The reptilian scales were no longer pulsing with administrative finality. They burned with the colors of emergency authority. When General Saw enter, he did not greet her with pleasantries or apologies for past dismissal. He moved directly to the problem at hand. You identified patterns that we missed, he said. Patterns that prevented us from seeing an active threat. I need to know if you can continue to identify those patterns, if you can see through the false operations that have been set up to hide the real strategy. Looked at the tactical display. Information poured across it in overwhelming volumes. Sensor data from a dozen different sources. Communication logs that had been decoded and analyzed. Video feeds showing the agricultural colony in its final moments before the biological containment failed. But underneath all that data, there was something else. A pattern, the same pattern she had recognized during the examination. The agricultural colony was not the origin point, she said quietly. It was just the staging ground. The weapon came from somewhere else. General and Commander Vex exchanged a look that indicated they did not yet understand what she was saying. Moved to the holographic display and gestured at the historical data. The Merchant Consortium, they made 17 route deviations, but 3 of those deviations happened after the biological weapon was supposedly secured. Those deviations took them to a location outside the normal trade network, a location with no official designation, a location that is not supposed to exist on any map. A technician began working with the historical coordinates that had provided. Seconds later, an image appeared on the display. A space station, not a civilian station. The design and configuration indicated military construction, deep space, heavily shielded from standard surveillance, a place where a conspiracy could organize without being noticed. This station was built by the Union, Commander Vex said, accessing historical records. It was established 15 years ago before we discovered and destroyed their primary military presence. We thought all their facilities had been destroyed. This one was hidden better than the others, said. The agricultural colony was designed to get you looking in the wrong direction. Everyone's attention went to the collective because they were the obvious military threat. But they were not the threat. They were just a distraction. The real threat was a hidden military station that had been building weapons for a decade. General moved to a communication console. Send military vessels to the coordinates the human has identified. I want that station neutralized before it can launch any attack. But before the general could give full authorization, new data appeared on the displays. Ships, dozens of them. A full battle fleet emerging from stealth positions around the hidden station. They were already moving. They were already attacking. The battle that followed happened too quickly to track and too slowly to watch all at once. Missiles fired across the void of space. Energy weapons tore through shields and hull plating. Vessels that had taken years to construct were destroyed in minutes. But one ship managed to break through the defensive cordon. A vessel carrying the biological weapon. A weapons platform designed to deploy the pathogen across multiple systems. It was moving toward the nearest populated world, a trading hub that processed cargo and housed 50,000 beings from 100 different species. General looked at with an expression that mixed desperation and determination. Can you tell us where it will strike next? Examine the ship's trajectory, its velocity, its weapons configuration. She looked at the pattern of its movements, the way it was positioning itself relative to the planets and space stations in the region. Everything she knew about predators, about hunter tactics, about deception and misdirection came together in her mind. It is not going for the trading hub, she said. That is what you would expect, but they need time to execute whatever final part of their plan requires. They are going to draw your military forces toward the trading hub while they strike at something else, something they think you will not protect because you do not think it is valuable. What? General demanded. Pulled up the command structure of the Galactic Council. She looked at the location of each major government installation, and there it was, the pattern, the real target. Meridian Station, she said. They are targeting Meridian Station. They want to kill the council leadership. They want to create chaos and destroy the organizational structure that holds the council together. The alarms on Meridian Station began to sound immediately, but there was not enough time to evacuate everyone. There was barely enough time to get personnel to defensive positions. The biological weapon was already too close. Its targeting systems were already locking onto the station's vital systems. Was a human soldier, one of the first humans accepted into the Galactic Council's military service. He had been assigned to station security the same day had arrived for her examination. He did not have the advantage of generations of military training that other species possessed, but he had something that many soldiers did not have. He had a human's instinct to act when action was needed. When the weapon platform began its attack, led a small team to the station's defense grid. His weapons operator managed to get 3 shots off before the console exploded. All 3 shots struck the weapon platform, not enough to destroy it, but enough to damage its targeting systems. Watched from the command center as the biological weapon detonated near the station rather than striking it directly. The containment field was compromised, but only partially. 50,000 doses of biological agent spread through the vacuum of space instead of 50 million. It was not victory, it was survival. General made tactical decisions in rapid succession. He directed military forces to contain the biological agent. He sent defense vessels to pursue the weapon platform. He ordered evacuation of all non-essential personnel from Meridian Station. And then he turned to with an expression that was no longer dismissive. You will work with my tactical team. You will analyze every decision point made by the Union and the Collective. You will tell us where they will strike next and how they will try to fool us. I am not military, said. No, General agreed. You are something better. You are someone who sees threats that militaries trained by thousands of years of tradition cannot see. That is exactly what we need. Over the next 48 hours, the conspiracy was systematically dismantled. Every hidden base was located. Every stockpile of weapons was secured. Every member of the conspiracy that could be found was captured. The Collective, which had been positioned as the threat by Standard Council protocols, actually moved to help protect the trade routes. Their military strength proved essential in containing the biological agent and preventing it from reaching populated worlds. The Merchant Consortium was exposed as unwilling participants, threatened and coerced, and stood in the operations center of a military vessel called the Sword of. The ship had been named after the very world that the conspiracy had used as its staging ground. Reclaiming the name was a way of saying that darkness could be purified and light could return to even the most corrupted places. The command staff moved around her with practiced efficiency, performing their duties like components of a machine that had been precisely calibrated over centuries. She was not part of that machine. She moved differently. She thought differently, but somehow that made her more valuable to them now. The mission was straightforward in its description but complex in its execution. Hidden bases required dismantling, weapons required securing, prisoners required rescue. But underneath all those objectives was one simple task, needed to think like the hunters. She needed to predict where they would run, where they would hide, where they would make their final stand. Stood beside her, a human soldier in a uniform that still felt new against his skin. Humans had only been in galactic military service for a few months, but had proven himself alongside beings that had trained for decades. He understood that courage and quick thinking could match years of education and experience. Next target, said, looking at the data displayed before him. A research facility on a moon that orbits the second planet in the system. The facility was used for biological research before the conspiracy took control. We estimate 200 personnel on site, mix of guards and researchers. Examine the tactical information, the facility's layout, its defense systems, its escape routes. But more importantly, she examined the small details that other people overlooked. They are going to run, she said. The moment they detect our approach, they will abandon the facility. They have already removed the primary research data. The facility is now just a shell. How can you know that? Asked Commander, a military officer who had worked with the Galactic Council for 30 years. He had initially been skeptical of abilities. Now he treated her analysis like a prediction that had already been proven true. Because that is what I would do, said. If I had been hiding and I suddenly felt the danger closing in, I would not waste resources defending a facility that is no longer valuable. I would use that time to reach a location where I could regroup and plan another strategy. She pointed to a sector of the moon that appeared to be empty desert. They have another facility here, smaller, easier to defend, better positioned for escape. The prisoners they hold are probably there. That is where they will make their stand. The military team confirmed her prediction through extended sensor sweeps. The hidden facility was discovered exactly where it indicated. It was well defended. It had been designed for a last stand scenario. But it had been designed by military planners who expected their enemies to think like them. They did not expect an enemy who thought like prey. The assault on the hidden facility was swift and coordinated. Led a strike team through the rear entrance. Not the obvious front entrance where defenders would be concentrated, not the secondary entrance that was designed as a trap, but the maintenance tunnels that had identified by studying the structure and thinking about how systems needed to move through buildings in hidden ways. When resistance emerged, moved with the decisiveness of someone who understood that hesitation was death. He had been born on a world where speed and accuracy meant survival. He had been trained in formal military protocols. The combination made him lethal in ways that beings trained in only one system could not match. The prisoners were found in the lower sections of the facility, 200 beings from a dozen different species. Some had been used for research. Some had been forced to work on weapons assembly. Some had simply been kept as hostages against council actions. One prisoner was a child, a young member of the crystalline species, barely past the stage of initial formation. The child had been separated from its parent during the initial abduction. For 3 cycles, this child had existed in darkness, unable to bond with family, unable to integrate into its cultural collective. When rescue teams found the child, it was barely conscious. It had begun to fracture at the molecular level. Within days, without proper reintegration into its species' cultural bonds, it would have shattered into dust. Carried the child personally. He did not know the protocols for handling crystalline beings. He simply held the child carefully, moved with gentle speed, and delivered it to the medical team that waited on the rescue vessel. The child did not know. The child had no reason to trust a human. But it did. Something in the way moved, in the care he showed despite his unfamiliarity with the child's physiology, communicated safety. By the time the medical team had begun proper treatment, the child had already started to stabilize. Humans understood rescue on a fundamental level. They had spent their entire evolutionary history saving the young and the vulnerable because their world demanded it. Observed from the command center as the rescue operations concluded, prisoners were transferred to medical vessels. Facility systems were dismantled and removed. The hidden base that had been meant as the conspiracy's final stronghold became just another empty structure on just another moon. But the conflict was not truly over. It would continue for weeks as additional bases were discovered and neutralized. It would continue for months as the investigation determined the full scope of the conspiracy. It would continue for years as the Galactic Council worked to integrate the lessons learned into their threat assessment protocols. Its role expanded beyond simple tactical prediction. General requested that she formalize her threat assessment methodology. She began teaching other military officers how to think like creatures that evolved in harsh environments. She explained how to see not just what an enemy displayed, but what they hid, how to recognize camouflage, how to identify deception patterns. Many officers listened with skepticism. They had been trained to believe that direct analysis of available data was the only valid approach. But some listened with genuine interest. They understood that its perspective was not a replacement for their training, but an enhancement to it. Together, human intuition and traditional galactic military knowledge could create something stronger than either alone. 4 months after the crisis began, Dr. Adrian Cole stood before the full Galactic Council. He was no longer embarrassed about humanity's presence. He was no longer worried that his species had made a poor impression. He presented Hayes as humanity's official contribution to galactic security, not as a diplomat, not as a politician, but as a specialist in threat assessment through pattern recognition and threat prediction through understanding deception. The Council accepted. Humanity's probationary status was lifted 6 months early. Human military officers began training programs throughout the Council's military structure. Humans began serving in official security positions. Humans began teaching their perspective to species that had never needed to understand a predator world. At night, sometimes stood on Meridian Station and looked out at the stars. She thought about Earth, so far away now. She thought about her parents, who had taught her to see danger in the subtle shifts of wind and light. She thought about the human soldiers who were now fighting alongside beings from civilizations that had existed for thousands of years longer than humanity had. Was promoted to commander of a mixed species task force. Half the team was human. Half the team was representatives from other species. They worked together with an efficiency that surprised other military units. Human intuition combined with alien technological sophistication. Human creativity combined with alien discipline. They became the most effective response team in the Galactic Council's military structure. And it was not because humans were superior. It was because humans had evolved to see threats that other species could not see. To survive against predators, you had to understand predators better than the predators understood themselves. The examination that had seemed like such a failure at first had actually been the beginning of everything. The wrong answer in row 3 had led to the discovery of a conspiracy that would have destroyed the Galactic Council. The paranoia of a young woman from a primitive death world had saved trillions of lives. And as the stars wheeled overhead, as ships moved through space carrying humans and aliens working together, as new protocols were written and new understanding began to take hold, understood something fundamental. She had not failed that examination. She had passed a test that was far more important than any test the Galactic Council could design. She had done what humans were meant to do. She had looked at the danger others could not see. She had spoken the truth even when no one wanted to hear it. She had acted to protect others without concern for personal recognition or reward. The exam was meant to identify the threat. Everyone picked the wrong target, except her in row 3 who saw what the universe was not yet ready to see. And now the universe would never forget it. To helping transport the weapons. Most of their members were allowed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for immunity. The agricultural colony was revealed to be a prison camp where prisoners had been forced to work on weapon assembly. Many were freed. Many others had already been killed by the sabotaged containment systems. And at the center of it all, it was a human woman from a primitive death world who had seen the threat that no one else could see. Not because she was smarter, not because she was better trained, but because she came from a world where survival meant seeing through deception, where danger came quietly, where camouflage could be the difference between life and death. The signal was brief and filled with static. It conveyed only one clear message before cutting off. Biological weapons facility compromised. Weapon is active, biological contagion spreading. This is not a drill. Commander Vex's scales turned a color that's translator could not identify. Her heart stopped. Everything she had warned about, everything she had been dismissed for, everything that the Galactic Council had assured her could not happen, was happening right now. And they had less than 24 hours to decide whether Hayes had been paranoid and wrong, or prophetic and right. And she was the only one who had noticed. That would matter soon. Whether it would matter in a way that saved humanity or condemned them remained to be seen. The examination hall fell silent. The representative made a clicking sound that might have been laughter or contempt or shock. Commander Vex's scales froze in their pulsing pattern, becoming completely still. Hayes, age 26, from a small planet called Earth, had just told the Galactic Council that it was wrong.